Hello.
Hi, how are you today?
Good. How are you?
Very well, very well. Thank you for asking. Before we go any further, me and my colleague will be it will be the interpreters for today. Whenever he or she comes in, can you make us co-host?
Yes, absolutely.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
I just passed off the hosting to you. You good? Okay, I'm gonna head out.
And then I know Tomas was in a waiting room. I was also hanging out in a waiting room. And so I think we like switched back links for a second, but I know he's trying to join. We'll give him a second. Let me also figure out my lights while I do this. I'm very yellow.
Oh,
Hi, how are you?
good. How are you?
Doing well. We have similar blues going on
Oh, I
in our
don't hear it.
rooms.
Oh,
No,
okay.
in our rooms, your background.
Oh, in my background?
Yeah, I have a blue room too.
Oh, this is a backdrop.
Ah, gotcha.
I thought you were talking about music. Anyway, I'm one of your interpreters for this afternoon.
Fantastic. Lovely to meet you.
And so my question or my favor to ask you is if you could spotlight or make a host myself and the other interpreter, because then we can pin each other, because when so many people are in the room, it's hard to find each other to know when to switch on and off.
Sure.
I'm co-host.
Okay.
And I'll give you a spotlight.
Awesome.
Here is.
And I don't know if the other interpreter has joined yet.
I don't think that he's joined yet either.
Yeah.
We'll
Gallery.
give another.
But we'll be able to talk about those. And Pilot Light supports integrated food education. So what we mean by that is teachers teach through food their academic content that they would be covering in the lesson. We work with teachers pre-K through 12, so all learners in their elementary and high school careers. And we have a very inquiry-centered model that's rooted in our food education standards. As you can see them on the slide, we like to talk about food holistically. So yes, engaging young people in conversations about what, vitamins and minerals their bodies need, but also thinking more broadly than that about how are they part of the food system? How does food connect to them personally? How does it connect to us as a society? Where does our food come from? And so by engaging in a teacher-driven model, we work with teachers who then teach food education lessons in their classroom. That helps support our engagement of young people in the conversation of food education. So our theory of change, that's perfect, good transition. Our theory of change is by investing in classroom teachers to deliver food education. We believe that creates opportunities for students to hone and tap into their curiosity, which can create change both in the short and the long term. We know that students have knowledge and attitudes and skills that they can take and inform their relationships with food. And for me, when I think about a future-proof food situation and a future-proofed food system, I think that youth are powerful, and it's important that we invite them into this conversation. and also consider what they can bring to this conversation. You can go to the next slide. So we're into our why section, which is where I get to talk a little bit more about why we chose to do a teacher-driven model for food education. There are lots of different approaches, like I mentioned earlier, of ways that you can engage young people with food. It's so important to our team that we talk about holistic food education. So again, not just talking about, you need vitamin B, you need to eat proteins and whole grains. Those things are important, but that's not the only way that we relate to food in our lives. And in order for really truly meaningful opportunities for learning for students, it needs to meet them where they're at. Teachers are the folks that know their students best. So by helping teachers understand the food education standards and integrate them into their curriculum, what that does is it allows for multiple points of entry for the learner. What I mean by that is there's more than one chance to practice that learning. Learning is messy. It is always evolving. It is something that takes different shapes based on what the learner is bringing to the situation. It's interactive. And so by allowing for those multiple points of entry and promoting curiosity, we hope and intend to see bigger shifts in students and in their experience. We've seen that our teacher-driven model, with that kind of continued opportunity to engage in these conversations, meaningful shifts creates meaningful shifts in thinking and in doing. Some of the reasons that we appreciate our teacher-driven model is that CAS food is a primary. I know when I was teaching 10 years ago, I almost never went down to the cafeteria, right? That was my time in the day where I was going to make my copies, run to the restroom. I taught high school, so usually some student was like crying over a breakup or something. And it didn't occur to me to think about how I could be leveraging food as a part of what I was doing throughout the day, even though we all need to eat multiple times throughout the day. Our teacher-driven model, like I've mentioned, also builds and strengthens classroom relationships, and it allows for this reciprocal learning between academic and social emotional engagement. It can be a very powerful tool. I think if you were to think back about any sort of event you attend, any sort of type of space you like to learn in, there's often food associated with that. And I think that is powerful and true in K-12 models as well. The other reason that our teacher-driven model is so important, and this to me resonates on a level of equity, is it centers community and student experience and voice. And so rather than the pilot light staff or any one person saying, here's the list of knowledge that we need to have and that students need to get about food and what food means, it really should be an open and evolving process. It should be relevant and responsive, because that's when that learning starts to transfer outside the classroom and beyond the classroom. Next slide. So on this slide here are a couple of different quotes and testimonials from our teachers. I won't read them off right now. We'll make sure that everyone has the slide deck shared out. But one of the most important whys to why food education and why school-based instruction is so critical to our equitable future food system is that engaging learners in conversations about the food system when they're young through this integrated food opportunity creates lifelong opportunities for active and informed participation. When we think back to our early educational experiences, so many of us can point to a teacher that shaped our trajectory, that shaped our understanding of something, and that really changed the way that we thought about ourselves and thought about our world. By planting those seeds early on, it creates that ripple effect that can go and create change across the system. Next slide. Our next and related piece as to why this is so important is that integrating food and academic learning together instead of keeping them as separate increases the relevance for both young people and leads to greater likelihood of that transfer beyond the classroom. So say, for instance, you're like me, you were not always the most engaged math student. by bringing in measuring cups and by bringing in, a different opportunity to actually make food in the classroom, that might have led to me having a stronger understanding of multiplying fractions, something that I'm still pretty slow at to this day. And it also just allows, like I said, for that curiosity to be the dominant force in guiding this food education. To me, curiosity is the root of innovation, and innovation is what we need for this future-proof food system. Next slide.
Thanks, Eileen. So right now, hoping to maybe just set the stage on how farm to school initiatives can help cultivate vibrant communities and really connect different partners, within your school community and outside of it. So within the farm to school movement, you may have heard the theory of the triple bottom line and its adage, kids win, farmers win, and communities win. And farm to school and farm to early childhood education provides children and their families the option to access nourishing local foods while strengthening local economies and contributing to vibrant, connected communities. Farm to school implementation differs from location, but it always includes one or more of the following three core elements. So procurement, local foods that are purchased, promoted, and served in cafeteria or meals as a snack or in the classroom in taste test settings. Education, so students participating in education activities related to agriculture, food, health, nutrition, which is something that our partners Pilot Light really champion. And then student gardens, so students can engage in hands-on experiential learning through gardening and access all the benefits of that. So right now, there are about 67,000 schools participating in farm to school, which is about 42% of all US schools, totaling about 23.6 million engaged students. And we would just love to see that grow. So next slide. So farm to school, of the many benefits that it provides, one that's somewhat overlooked is how it actually impacts adult community members. Of the multifaceted benefits of farm to school, we know that it helps kiddos access nutrition, nourishing foods. It helps youth understand the importance of healthy foods and where it comes from, but it also helps create opportunities for food and cooking education for school cafeteria workers who may not have established knife skills or other scratch cooking skills. And when you move away from relying on processed or packaged meals, it opens up a dimension of skills and competencies that school food workers can hone and take to other employment opportunities in the future. Next slide. So farm to school can provide a sustainable, rewarding, economically impactful market channel for agricultural producers. Producers and food distributors can see the impacts of farm to school through increased income for farm to school sales and the establishment of long-term revenue streams for individual farmers, increase the number of vendor and producer relationships and diversity of methods for procurement utilized by schools. So meaning that schools don't really have to rely on one farmer, and also creates an opportunity for farmer cooperatives to thrive. It also increases market diversification and economic growth opportunities for farmers, including forward contracting and the exploration and processing of value-added product creation for institutional markets, which can really open up their market capabilities to hospitals, colleges, senior care facilities, and many other institutions. And lastly, it can create opportunities for farmers to be pillars within their own communities through new relationships with school districts and school community members, as well as the families of students. So next slide. And just to give you an example of how these methods have been put into action, I wanted to highlight the work of Glenn Holmes. Yep, there we go. The work of Glenn Holmes. He's a farmer and a food hub manager and a farmer cooperative organizer down in Florida, Alabama, and Mississippi. Glenn has pioneered the organizing of producers of color in Florida in those states to work together in creating businesses and business options for decades before farm to school was considered a viable market option for farmers. Before farm to school was even a term or a modern concept, Glenn worked with other farmers in his community to ensure that communities were fed and that their businesses survived. So this video was basically a producer feature case study in the Bringing the Farm to School project, which is a cooperative agreement between the National Farm to School Network, the National Center for Appropriate Technology, and the USDA Community Food Systems Division. Go ahead and you can start the video.
Sound good. Pull it up real quick.
My name is Glenn Holmes. I'm a food hub manager and executive director of the New North Florida Cooperative in the Holmes County Food Hub.
Could you give us a brief overview of the food hubs in Holmes County, North Florida, and what you got, and what got you interested in school sales?
Well, several years ago when I started working with, I started off with USDA working with small farmers. And USDA had a lot of cost share programs, but there's always an economical shortfall as it relates to small farmers being able to really participate in that program. So I thought that if it was a market out there that small farmers could access, it would help them economically be able to utilize those programs. And probably about 8 to 10 years after I thought all that, I engaged a meeting in Atlanta, Georgia with other small co-ops, food directors, ag marketing service, FNS, and the idea was how efficient would it be for small farmers to procure with local school district. And that was my entry with selling to the school began about 20 years ago.
Okay. Not only do you run a food hub, but you are a producer too. Tell us about what you grow on your farm and why you chose schools as a market for your product.
Well, we mostly grow what I call culturally sound product, because we try to target school district with a high African American population. So of course we look at collard greens, we look at sweet potatoes, sweet corn, field peas, and one of the main reasons we chose this school market because it made it easy for us on production, planning our production, processing, and also distribution, because we can do it in either small quantities or large quantities. It's based on how the schools plan on making the product.
Okay.
Great. Thank you. So in addition to the producer benefits, just wanted to highlight also that farm to school also benefits broader communities through school-based agriculture or school community gardens. And it creates opportunities for communities to collaborate with each other. And these are ways in which you may not actually think of as being included within farm to school programming. For some communities, especially communities of color in both rural and urban settings, schools are one consistent and sort of mainstay institution for their communities. School, also though for children can anchor communities and really help them to sort of culminate and compile all the desires for their community. So we see that really reflected through school gardens, and we have seen school gardens be a source of sort of experiential learning and education for students. School gardens can also serve as a supplemental source of food in school cafeterias, and school gardens can also serve and feed the broader community. So these are just some of the pretty interesting examples of how school food is also related to school gardening, and is something that's also encompassed within the farm to school movement. And to kind of give you just go ahead, sorry, next slide, please, sorry. And just to share another video to exemplify how school gardens and school procurement can be brought together for diverse communities. Just want to share this video, really centering the programming that's coming out of the Hardin School District in Hardin, Montana. The Hardin School District are one of the project partners in the Sea Change and Native Communities project. This particular district, it serves a majority of the Crow Reservation community, and they have built a farm to school program that centers youth empowerment while also revitalizing native foodways. So,
Verbo vacation home, you always
Farm to School enriches the community by healing all the families. They reconnect with the land. There's a history of our people, of the disconnect of the land, and so, with all these activities with the gardening and everything, we've been able to heal.
Farm to school means everything. It means community, it means gathering, and it means that we're gonna sit down and eat really good food. I've been super lucky to be able to be working in Farm to School for the last 7 years. During that time, I've learned a lot about food, what it means to me, what it means to my community, and what it means to bring people together. It's super important for the food to be culturally reflective of the community, because it creates an opportunity for individuals, especially our students, to be able to take pride in their food.
It brings up tradition for the students. It honors their families. It honors the past. And I think they're more interested if they can connect it to their family or the past or their culture.
I think the food that we grow right now affects my culture because my ancestors depended on it. We actually lived off of this, and my ancestors lived off of this. I carry it on from my ancestors because they mostly depended on that.
Our ancestors did all farming to keep us healthy. Without farming, we wouldn't be here.
I think it's important for kids to know where their food comes from. That's a battle that we face. We've hosted field trips out here with the students coming out to see where the vegetables are being grown, that they're being served in the cafeteria. And we have actually gone to the school too as Meet Your Farmer events and brought samples along, and to be able to meet the kids in person and for them to put a face with the name of Living Your Farm. Farm to School is a great way, a program for us to be connected in the community with the public school system and be able to provide fresh, local grown vegetables.
When I think of Farm to School, I think of my own kids and the opportunities for them to eat foods that come from our area.
This is something that is a major, project that is healing a whole nation.
I believe in Farm to School because I believe in the people and the community, and building all of those connections to strengthen the other pieces of our community too.
Thank you. And if you're interested in learning more about the Sea Change and Native Communities Project, you can access our website, which will have a complete overview of this current iteration of the project and previous. So just to get back into it, depending on where you are positioned within the farm to school spectrum, you can engage in the farm to school movement as well as NFSN in a number of ways. So procurement, if you're interested in helping your school food service department procure local foods, you can access resources like NFSN's procurement resource toolkit, which is located on our website. And we have a complete database there with a number of other resources that have been developed by NFSN as well as the USDA Community Food Systems Division. If you're a producer and you're interested in sort of accessing school markets, we have resources for you through our Bringing the Farm to School project. There you'll find producer-specific resources covering how to scale production for selling to school markets, and simple resources like how to spark up conversations with school food authorities and other administrators. If you're interested in policy, we have policy efforts that are current and ongoing. Please take a look at some of those advocacy initiatives like the Values Aligned Universal Meals campaign, which is prioritizing universal school meals for all children. And you can also take a look at some of the state-based policy efforts, many of which were generated by the Illinois Stewardship Alliance and the Illinois Farm to School Network. If you're interested in school gardens, you can check out our website as well. We have a resource database there with toolkits covering best practices for planning and implementing school-based agriculture. But you should also check out the amazing work of the Kids Gardening Network and the School Garden Support Organization. And then lastly, if you're interested in how to start food education curriculum with kiddos and other students, look no further than Pilot Light, which is a great segue back into Ellen taking care of us. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Tomas. So we've both had the opportunity to talk about who we are as organizations, why we do our work. Tomas kicked us off into our how. For Pilot Light, there's kind of two main ways right now that we do our work. The first is through formal programming. So right now we have 3 active formal programs, which I'll talk a little bit about. We have our Ag Ed and Advocacy program, which is a science-based curriculum that is 6 lessons long, and this is available pre-K through 12, but right now it's active in 6th through 8th grade in Chicago Public Schools. And the focus of this is building a foundational knowledge in agriculture. I think particularly in urban areas like the city of Chicago, students don't always find agriculture to be something that's relevant to their lives. So building up enough of that platform and foundation to invoke that curiosity, and then what those first 5 lessons build up to is a food advocacy project. So in that 6th lesson of that program, teachers and students identify an issue area that they've become passionate about or a change that they want to see in their community. They then have the chance to find a community partner like Farm to School or any of the other folks that are on this, maybe their own school garden. It could be myriad things, just based on whatever kind of issue within agriculture sparked their curiosity that students feel they want to make a change in. You'll find that this is a common theme in Pilot Light's programming, is that we want to really make sure that students have the opportunity to leverage their voice in their learning. So often will culminate in food advocacy projects. The second program that we have active right now is our Snack Time Explorers program, which also just launched in Chicago Public Schools. This is currently available kindergarten through 3rd grade. And what this program is, it's designed focused on social emotional learning, and it's about tasting and trying new foods in connection with the USDA's Fresh Fruit and Vegetable Program. For those of you that haven't had the opportunity to experience that program, it's a federally funded program where students in with certain percentage of free reduced lunch population in their school have access to a sample of a fresh fruit and a fresh vegetable every week that comes into their classroom. So we built out lessons aligned to our food education standards that give teachers and students the opportunity to try new foods and have conversations about them that are positive and based not in the idea that you have to like every single thing that you try, but that there's benefit in being open-minded and exploring new foods, hence the name. We are excited to extend that program next year. And then last, our formal program, and this is Pilot Light's most robust and most intensive program. Our Food Education Fellowship is an opportunity for teacher leaders who really want to invest integrated food education into their classroom. So this opportunity is available for teachers pre-K through nationwide, or pre-K through 12 nationwide. So not just limited to Chicago teachers. And this cohort participates in a year-long program. They attend monthly professional development with Pilot Light, each organized around a different food education standard. And then they have the opportunity to integrate food into their classroom learning once a week. So this is a really robust program. One of the things we love most about this program is the level of teacher autonomy. So though we do support with different lessons and resources and ideas, it's up to teachers to decide how they want to bring that food in the classroom. We've seen some really creative things. We had a teacher that was teaching chemical change and brought in pancake making supplies, and students made pancakes, and they were able to see how it bubbled and talk about chemical change. And this kind of brings us back to that idea that in that way, food and academic learning can drive each other. Next slide. The other way that we do our work, knowing that we're currently a small but growing organization, is we have an online platform and we have free resources available. So our Food Education Center is a free online lesson library. We'll drop the link to that in just a moment. And that is so that teachers anywhere in the world can create a login and access those lessons. We're constantly adding new updates to this, new lessons and curricula. One example is that we have a school food. This is an English language arts 7-lesson set that starts with our first food education, talking about food connects us to each other, and branches all the way up to that culminating advocacy project. But it's on something that students are very familiar and very passionate about, which is the food that is on their cafeteria lunch tray. I don't know the last time y'all have been in a school, but I feel like there's not a day that doesn't go by where I don't see a headline about a school food article popping up. And what a great way to channel something that is directly there in the school building, has students' interest, has a lot of investment, and use it again to drive that academic instruction, but more importantly, to create that relevance of food education in a young person's life. Lastly, I've talked a lot about them. I'm pretty excited about them at any given point. If you ever want me to really just talk for a long time, you can ask me about our food education standards. I think they're this incredibly holistic framework. There are ways that we can adopt standards, or that other organizations that aren't directly classroom serving can use the food education as a model and as a framework. So an example, for instance, might be a district adopting the standards as a school health policy in the way that you might have a mental health policy. They can be an instructional tool for after school programming, right? Or before school programming, that out of school time. They can support breakfast and lunch programs, and also can be a guide for really any sort of framework where you're looking to create and promote inquiry among young people about their role in the food system. Next slide. All right, so we have hit the activity portion of today. I will drop a link in the chat to a document. One of the things that Tomas and I, when we were planning our session, that we thought was so valuable, we've talked a lot about the nature of these programs, the accessibility of these programs. And I find that sometimes when you're in a space where you're doing a lot of learning, you can maybe get a little overwhelmed by the number of ideas. And then when you head back to your regular day-to-day on Monday or Saturday or whenever your work week starts, the implementation part can be a little bit tricky. So what we've done is created a doc that links all of the resources that we've both talked about, and we want to support your access and your implementation with a little bit of planning time. So you can feel free to come off mute, drop questions in the chat, and Tomas and I will be here to answer questions and guide this, but we did want to provide the space for you to engage. Just a functional note, the way that you'll need to interact with this document is to open it and make a copy. Otherwise, we would all be putting our thoughts into the one document, which, though powerful, could be a little messy. So instead of requesting edit access, you'll want to make a copy of the document so you can edit and have your own thoughts in there. Tomas, anything I missed on that?
Nope, you got it.
Awesome.
And again, with this time, if there are any questions that you have for Eileen or I, feel free to share them through the chat or come off mute.
I'm seeing a question in the chat from Kevin, who asked if this program is aimed at a specific age range. I will clarify from Pilot Light's end, and then I'll let Tomas clarify from NSFN. Pilot Light programs currently serve pre-kindergarten through seniors in high school. So that's our target range. We're looking at probably ages like 4 to 5 up through 18 and beyond.
And for National Farm to School and the greater Farm to School movement, we're primarily focusing on K through 12, but we also do have a lot of resources and programmatic efforts for early childhood education, so preschools in that regard too, just because they're different, differently structured institutions, but primarily a lot of the resources that have been generated are for K through 12. And I see that Jamal, you have your hand up.
Yes, thanks for this presentation. This is really exciting work, just what I was looking for. And I want to know what kind of ways do you measure your impact? Do you have any metrics or anything like that?
Yeah, I can start. So we get a lot of our data support from the USDA. They have what's called the Farm to School Census that they every few years they'll compile just a survey of participating school districts around the country that are currently engaged in farm to school. Each iteration of that census, we try and get more and more accurate and really reflecting on what actual farm to school programming looks like for each particular district. But that was how I was able to kind of give you some of those numbers earlier in the presentation, is actually just through the USDA's farm to school census. And then in addition to that, all of our programmatic efforts as sort of a custom and a practice undergo an evaluation process just to ensure that they're impactful in the ways that we've sort of missioned and intended them to be. So that's one sort of way just to ensure that we're we're properly evaluated and reaching our impact goals.
And I can pick this up for the Pilot Light team. Jamal, you've asked probably my second favorite question. If the first one was about our food education standards, talking about evaluation and impact is something that's particularly exciting to our team right now. So there's a few different things. In general, we track the numbers of teachers that we engage and serve in our programming. We track interaction with our food education center through downloads of lessons, knowing that that can be a little bit imprecise. But the bigger thing that we look at is qualitative data that is reflective of community knowledge and community experience. So this can look like student and teacher pre-post surveys where, you know, before and after programming, they reflect on their knowledge and share information. But we're also making formal our approach and our statement for being teacher-centered in our evaluation. And just to give a sense of what I mean when I say that is every classroom looks different. And one of the things that everyone that does mission-aligned work can struggle with is gathering enough data to demonstrate impact for reasons of funding and program effectiveness, while also maintaining that respect and expertise and autonomy of the folks closest to the work. So a lot of what we're building out in our evaluation work now are different ways that we can capture teacher experience. We have our teachers involved in building out our evaluative tools to make sure that we're asking questions of learners that are developmentally appropriate, that reflect backgrounds and account for differences in region and age and community and all of those pieces. We are really informed by the work of Chicago Beyond, which is an incredible organization. If folks haven't had the chance to check out their work, they really are such a motivating and inspiring organization for me. And so we've taken some time to think about what our mission towards evaluation is. So not just how are we evaluating our progress towards our mission, but how are we ensuring that our commitments to diversity, equity, and inclusion live in our evaluation? How are we making sure that our value of teacher and student voice plays into our evaluation? And it's an evolving process. Like I've said a couple of times on this call, that we're at a stage of growth, we're at a stage of innovation, and that's why I think it's very exciting to me to discuss this work. It's a great question. Mm-hmm. I'm also noticing something in the chat. Tomas, were you going to add something there?
Nope, that was it.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm. We had a question about the Food Education Fellowship from Fiona. She asked if it's only open to classroom teachers and kind of what the workload looks like for that. I definitely hear you as a teacher that left the classroom in large part because of the workload. Teachers absolutely are overloaded. I actually was reading a report about teacher burnout rates yesterday. One of the things that Pilot Light does is we stipend our teachers. So one of the things I think that people often make the mistake of is assuming that teachers, because they care so much about their students, want to work for free. And so part of the way that we help create bandwidth and we help create balance about incorporating integrated food education is through stipending the participation and stipending the work that goes into it. And so there are support systems built into the programs, including opportunities to connect with peers. That peer community can be really powerful and impactful for teachers. The Pilot Light team supports in connecting to community partners. How each school chooses to allocate additional planning time or not is kind of up to the school. But the way that we want to make sure that we're approaching this work from a lens of equity is to compensate teachers for the additional work, because we know that it does take a bit of a learning curve to bring food into the classroom. Aoife asked a question, do you think this could translate well for adult learning? I'd love to see an application of a program like this to farmers market, demonstrations, or other adult learning spaces. Aoife, if you could clarify for me if that's a question for me or Tomas and which program you're talking about, I think we'd be better able to answer that.
Hey Hey, yeah, I was curious, I guess, kind of about the pilot format, but either one. Like, I'm interested in the perspective and like the possibility and the imagination behind how you could see that applying to adults. Thank you.
Yeah, great question. Tomas, you want to kick us off?
Sure, yeah. We so we've been, as I kind of mentioned in the presentation, we've been really wanting to explore just some of the kind of peripheral impacts of farm to school programming, how they're actually affecting, well, one, how they're affecting producers as they navigate school markets, but also food service personnel, how, how can we ensure that, food service personnel have buy-in when they're participating in farm to school programming, how do we ensure that they have the necessary skills to scratch cook, and that's something sort of in development right now in terms of developing resources for communities to access any kind of best practices on establishing those programs with sort of adults in mind. Right now, and I would say majority of the work of the farm to school movement up until this point has been centered on focusing on school food service directors and really helping them understand how to talk and engage to a producer. But we're really want to look at this sort of in a dimensional way and understand how we can support the entire school food service staff in a way that's thoughtful and intentional.
And I think from my end, this is where I see those food education standards coming in as an organizing framework. So the standards look at food from a place of connection, sources and origins, and environmental impact, how we develop our own food stories and our behavior and make our food choices, and how food impacts health, and then what we want to do with that information. And so I think if we were to think about, you gave the example in the chat of a farmer's market, there's opportunities for all of those to come to fruition. I think that can be a prompt for conversation about how we're sourcing our food, where it's coming from, what it's doing for us, and how it's coming from our environment. But I also think for other adult learning spaces, what I've noticed is that folks tend to have one or two of those standards that they gravitate towards. For instance, if you're a dietitian, food education standard 5 about food impacts health might be where you spend most of your day. And by looking at the full framework of the standards, it, for me, is a point of reflection to think holistically about the work that we're doing. And I think sometimes we can get a little bit tunnel vision, which is great. That's how you build your expertise. But I think where I would see them living in adult spaces is using the standards as a framework to promote conversation and reflection and build more towards a holistic discussion around it. Shola asked, do you, and my apologies, Shola, please come off mute if I've said your name incorrectly. Do you have to be involved with the USDA in a school setting in order to have access to the farm to school program?
Yeah, so depending on the grant, I would say, the Community Food Systems Division of the USDA offers grants, every annual cycle. And to access that grant funding, you do have to have some pretty established demonstration that the impact of your work will benefit school communities and cafeterias. There are other branches of the USDA that offer some pretty nimble and flexible grants that farm to school can really fit into nicely, that you wouldn't have to necessarily demonstrate that you're going to be serving a school community or a cafeteria at the end, but are involving youth or schools in some other capacity. And those are grants through the National Institute of Food and Agriculture, and to some regard, the Agricultural Marketing Services Division. So yeah, there's some pretty interesting grant opportunities out there to fund farm to school programming, but the one dedicated division of the USDA, you have to explicitly demonstrate that you are part of a school district or serving a school district in some regard.
All right, our next question in the chat comes from Karen. who asked, can an advocate participate in the program if a school can't afford to send a teacher from the classroom? Since that mentions the classroom, I'm going to assume that's a pilot-like question. And I will say, absolutely. Our programs are funded through a variety of different sources, some of which do look to the school or the district to provide funding, but most of which are offered. For instance, our fellowship is a no-cost program to participants. And so that stipend is something that the Pilot Light team fundraises for and provides that opportunity to engage in. And so it depends on the type of program. For schools that are just getting started, you have my email. I'm the person to talk to about that. And that's where that food education center can also be a really helpful starter resource, because those have some plug and play lessons that don't require a formal program, but can start to gradually introduce food education in the classroom. And I think we have time for one more question, but Tomas and I listed our contact information on the sheet that we dropped in there. So please feel free to reach out. I'll speak for myself and say that I'm very happy to answer any questions. It sometimes can be slow to answer emails, but I promise I will get to them within a week. Let's see, for our one more question, Howard was next in line, which said, have values-driven public procurement policies influence your programs in any way across the country? Values-driven public procurement policies. That's a tongue twister, Howard. Go ahead, Tomas. I'll let you take that one. I think that's probably more aligned for you.
Sure. Yeah, it definitely has in some pretty overt ways, but it's also revealed a lot of different challenges and hardships that I would say, if there are policies that are promoting like procuring from BIPOC producers, has really kind of highlighted some of the barriers that emergent producers have in accessing a school market, or frankly any kind of institution that may have certain types of procurement, like procurement regulations or procurement needs. And I think this was somewhat touched on in a session previous to this one, the farm to institution session, which was had a lot of great information coming out of it. But we have seen some pretty intentional values-based procurement efforts by schools to ensure that their supply chains are of color, to ensure that the producers that they're sourcing from are of color. But that usually can't happen without also buy-in from distributors and buy-in from third-party food aggregators or food hubs. And that's where things get a little sticky and a little complicated actually not a little, very complicated. That's one effort that we're really wanting to pay more attention to. When you sort of break down the term farm to school, the two, meaning how the food is actually getting from the farm to school, is probably one of the more complicated parts that hasn't really been examined enough, like distribution and all the logistics that go along with ensuring that a producer can easily market their product into a school, is one complicated effort that we're really hoping to examine and reduce barriers for all producers to engage in farm to school programming.
Perfect. Thank you both so much for such an informative session. For everybody still here, I'm about to launch a poll. We have about 2 minutes left. It should take about that long. It's for feedback that will go to all of our speakers and our summit leaders. Thank you to our translators, and thank you to all of our participants. And once you finish up that poll, I'll end the session. So thank you all. We got all the responses. Right on time.
Thanks, everybody.
Well, thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Mhm.